you were mentioning Pearson. If you want to move Pearson, you might have to eat some of his salary, and that's another component that we're getting into, is that the Canadiens only have one retention slot remaining, because two of them, and that's until July 1st. So they have retained some salary on Jeff Petrie. They have retained some salary on Joel Edmondson. So now they have only one retention slot remaining. They can either use it at the trade deadline or wait to make a move at the draft. And Petrie, it's over 2 years. So this one retention slot would still be applicable next season. So they have to really evaluate at what time that retention slot is best used. Is it at the trade deadline, or are you better off waiting and try to do something at the draft when the market is different, when the types of possibilities are different, because everybody's interested, everybody's got more, they see their money differently.
They're going to have more of it. They're going to have more of it coming up for the first time in a long time. But yeah, I think that last year at the deadline, the Canadiens were less willing to retain money on Mike Hoffman because of how many slots they wanted to leave a slot free for the draft. But I think this year is somewhat different in the sense that everyone's getting the cap bump. So that retention slot might be less important at the draft than it was over the last few years. But it's definitely a factor, listen, if the Canadiens are going to trade Jake Allen, well, first of all, for sure, if they're going to trade Tanner Pearson, they're going to have to retain money. There's no doubt about it. So that would take up that last slot, would sort of handcuff them at the draft. But I don't think it's as night or, life or death as it was last year. But if they're going to trade Jake Allen, they're probably going to have to retain salary. And I don't think the Canadiens are all that willing to do that. But because if they do that, then not only do they have no more retention slots this year, that means they only have one retention slot next year.
Yeah.
Because of Petrie. So it's definitely a factor. It's which is what Jake Allen is it's so complicated with him, is that the extra year, some teams could look at it as a good thing. He's a good insurance policy in goal. Is he a goalie that's going to be a difference maker and win you rounds in the playoffs? Probably not, but he can avoid losing rounds in the playoffs. He can prevent you from goaltending being the reason why you got knocked out of the playoffs, as opposed to goaltending being the reason why you advance. So that has some value to it, but it's the retention issue is, I think, really going to be sort of a top of mind issue, and the Canadiens' willingness to do that with Allen is going to be interesting to see, because already, Ken Hughes, when he made the Jeff Petrie trade to Detroit and agreed to retain this year and next, he kind of qualified it as being like, well, we got a good young defenseman who was Gustav Lindstrom, who now plays for the Anaheim Ducks, was lost on waivers, got a good goalie who is Calvin DeHaan and now plays, not Calvin DeHaan, what's Casey DeSmith? Yeah, that's right. Casey DeSmith, who now plays in Vancouver and netted the Canadiens Tanner Pearson, said, we felt, obviously they got a draft pick out of it. And so that was the main thing. The second round pick was the meaty part. Yeah. Yes, but it's that's the price that they paid for a second round pick, was to take on 2.4, whatever it is, $2.3 million on their cap next year. So, the management of that retention slot, I think it would make the Canadiens somewhat uneasy to head towards the draft with no retention slots available. But I do think that this year is somewhat different than last year, in the sense that there's more money in the pool. Therefore, maybe retaining salary will become less of an issue, and they can maybe manage it. So, but I'm of the mind that the only person that they would even consider using that retention slot for would be Allen, even if it really ties their hands next year.
Probably that they have more flexibility and leeway if they're looking at taking a contract back in return, because that space is not unlimited, but almost. I mean, they've got so much money available to them on LTIR that they could certainly take a bad contract back, at least for the end of this season, and
as opposed to retaining salary.
As opposed to retaining salary.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So then you could potentially trade Allen if you take back a bad contract in return. It's probably an avenue that's worth pursuing more. I don't know to which extent you can have both a match for a team that looks for a goalie, B, a team that for whom it makes sense to have a goalie signed next year at that price, and C, that has a bad contract to trade in return. So it becomes and D, convincing that team that Allen is the best candidate among all the available goalies out there. So
yes.